Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on Compliance is Evolving and You're Being Left Behind. We're glad you're here today to discuss this issue with Josh Lowe, our speaker. I'm Ann Cosgrove, the Editorial Director at Facility Executive, and the webinar today is presented by AkitaBox. Before we get started, I would like to let you know that Josh will be on video today. If you can't see Josh and I right now, you want to pull down the top half of your screen or the side, however you have it set up, to see Josh and his slides during the presentation. I'll also let you know we will have a Q&A with Josh at the end of his talk, and so please send in your questions at any time, and Josh will address them at the end. Lastly, if you're interested in continuing education credits, you will get a certificate of attendance from Facility Executive after this presentation. I would also like to let you know you can use that question box in the control panel to send us in any technical difficulties you might encounter or any non-content related questions, and someone will answer you privately. But we do please use that question box for the Q&A toward the end. Now I would like to introduce Josh Lowe, co-founder and chief solution engineer at AkitaBox. He holds a degree in architecture, a background in construction, and a penchant for pushing the boundaries of new technologies. He literally helped write the book on building information modeling, BIM, as a contributing author to Mastering Autodesk Revit Architecture 2011 and 2012. And he's consulted on several BIM and facility management technologies. In 2016, Josh co-founded AkitaBox, a software as a service application for proactive building management. And AkitaBox offers a new visual way to maintain facilities that help customers improve operational efficiency and to reduce risk in their facilities by delivering real-world data in customers' built environments. So we're looking forward to hearing about compliance today and how that all fits in and how technology can help. So welcome, Josh. I'll hand it over to you.
Awesome. Thanks so much for the introduction. And thanks everybody for joining today and giving us some of your time. I'm still getting used to the controls on this. Sorry about that. We're going to kind of dig in and have a conversation around inspections and really kind of where organizations are stuck. I've had a lot of conversations both in the past and quite recently around this issue with both our clients now and when I used to run a consulting business, and really understanding that what was done in the past and where we were at even 10 years ago is really where most of us are today and most of our clients are today as we start to talk to them. And so, I want to spend a little time kind of talking about the status quo and why we're there and some organizational issues that come with change, right? And why we change and when we change and impediments to change. We'll talk about how we overcome that and start to build the foundation for something new, coming from the construction industry and leading kind of technology change and evolution there, and really coming over, in the last decade to the owner side and understanding that change is even slower here, and understanding that, there's a lot of barriers to break down and there's a lot of things that need to be done, not only organizationally, but also from systems and how problems are approached. And so we'll talk through some of that. And then we'll really focus on what are the opportunities, right? Every organization is different. Even within healthcare, right? You've been in one hospital, because they're all a little bit different and have some nuances or are organized slightly different within the larger organization. And so we'll talk about how we start to not only identify the opportunities, but maybe the low-hanging fruit and how do we start to make forward progress, because a lot of the things that we'll talk about, especially at the end and looking to the future, I think scares a lot of people in general because it seems so distant. But one of my favorite quotes is, the future is here now, it's just unevenly distributed. And when you think about that thought, we'll show some things that are very futuristic thinking, but are really happening today, and then really kind of look at that foundation building and leave you with some thoughts of maybe where can I get started, because everybody's in a different place. Some people are already doing electronic compliance, other people are still stuck in paper and clipboards, or some mix in between is usually maybe a little more prevalent as we go industry to industry. And so we'll really focus on on having a conversation around those things moving through. And again, as we go through, shoot questions in, if it's relevant, and feel free to kind of poke one at us here as we go through. Otherwise, we'll kind of get at them at the end. First off, though, what is the cost, right, of status quo? I don't think any of us really know. I think we try to put our fingers on it, but really the cost is missed opportunity. When we look at how the industry in general has adopted technology in the past, it's really been what I refer to as digitization. And so it's really taking things, right? I come from an architecture background, and we talked about the transition of, I remember sitting in my grandpa's garage doing true blueprints, probably inhaling fumes that nobody should ever inhale, right? Because that is how it happened. You did it by hand and it came out and you ran blueprints of it. We moved into AutoCAD. I still remember being in high school doing AutoCAD and still having to type in basically XY coordinates to get, a line to go from this point in space to this point in space, to do CNC documentation, and really have watched that whole evolution, right, of, going into AutoCAD, which was just digitization of hand drawing. But if I, deleted the door in the plan, I still had to go find the 4 different elevations that reference that door and delete the door there. And so it really only digitized a current manual process. I relate this to, building information modeling and Autodesk Revit. And if you're not familiar, it's, really drum it down to its basics. It took what was AutoCAD and 2D lines to create and represent something and took it to an object-based system. And so now a wall was a wall, or a door was a door, and it was an object, and it knew its width, height, how many windows were in it, what the square footage of glass was. You could interrogate this thing. And when I deleted a door out of the model, it no longer existed anywhere in the project. And so it was no longer referenced on an elevation drawing, and that transformed that industry. The owners are just starting to see this technology that really transformed, not just digitized, how the AEC industry did their daily work and delivered design projects and construction projects, and did the cool, if anybody's ever been a part of a 3D modeling system where they get to go in and clash detect and make sure everything fits in the building before it goes in, right? Like this whole idea of digital twinning, that was truly transformational for the industry, because we now use technology in a way that didn't just recreate the same process only on a screen, but it actually changed the process. It allowed us to do things during the process that we could have never done before, right? Think about, again, I'll relate this back to design, because I think a lot of what came out of the construction industry is headed towards the owner, and the owner kind of doesn't know what to do with it yet. And so, again, how that technology transformed the AEC industry. Think about design. I could now take one building shape and instantly turn it 360 degrees and figure out which rotation on that site would reduce the energy consumption based upon the sun in that specific area of the world, in that exact spot with the hills and the orientation, and instantly know the best way to orient it to get the best long-term energy care. Like, we never could do that before if we were doing hand drawing, or even if we were doing AutoCAD. That was only made possible through the transformational use of a technology, which is a 3D modeling technology called Revit, right? And so that started to drive change. What we really want to do is look back at the facilities and say, okay, but what's happening now, and what technologies are coming, and how do we start to get positioned for the tsunami of information that's headed our way? And if you really talk to your owners, or you're an owner yourself, you'll understand that you're already getting that information. If you've had a new construction project done in probably the last 15 years, 10 years for sure, it's probably getting delivered in in an Autodesk Revit or a building information modeling form, but you didn't know how to receive it, right? Like you're just still saying, hey, give me my floor plans. I want my PDFs. I want it exported to AutoCAD because all my other systems run on AutoCAD. And so, I need you to take that information and dumb it down to this old format. You're really looking at things through a lens of how you've done things in the past and the digitization. And what I'm really starting to challenge specifically owners to do is look at what's happening right now in the construction and architecture industry and what has been happening for the last almost 2 decades now, and start to understand that that transformation is available to you, and how you really start to use it is where you're missing the opportunity and where your costs are lying. And so, again, as we go through this, and I'm sorry, my computer's freaking out on me. We'll get there. Current challenges, right? Again, going back to that status quo, we're not taking advantage yet of that transformational technology that's out there. We don't know how to deal with the information. We still have plan rooms full of data. We're asking for O&M manuals and binders. Maybe we've gotten to the standpoint of it's a PDF, but it's a PDF that's organized in tabs and things and is really a digitization of what used to be the binder. It might get delivered on a thumb drive now. The thumb drive gets lost in the back of the desk, or it's uploaded to your file server, and you've just recreated the file system that was taking up a room is now taking up 2 servers in the back room, and it still takes you as much time to find what you're looking for because you've organized it in the same way. You've thought about the same problem and put it into a digital world, and we're all dealing with the repercussions of that. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with our clients who are like, yeah, I go in to look for an O&M manual and I have to remember what construction project it was and what year it was done in. And then I have to remember the spec section. And then I have to go look there and look at some middles and go find the O&M manual. And it's still that mind-numbing process of having to remember and make sure that it was put in the right spot. Some people have taken a little bit of a leap and gone to some file vault systems and some kind of metadata driven file organization. Great step forward, but it does tend to be disconnected from the other things that they're doing. And when it comes to compliance and going out and doing things like generator shutdowns, and when I shut down that generator, I want my people who are out there not only doing the checklist, but if something goes wrong, they need the information at their fingertips, like that O&M manual, to do their job correctly. And again, in today's status quo, that information is scattered all over. And so when we talk about the cost of the status quo, right, think about those little user stories in your head. All of us can think of one, right? Like, hey, you're standing in front of this thing, I'm doing an inspection on it, I'm going through the shutdown process, and it doesn't turn back on. Now what? Now I'm running to a plan room to try and find information. Am I going back to a console? Am I calling somebody to get information? How are we getting that stuff, right? And so when we talk about compliance and are you falling behind, right, you need to think about all the things that are intertwined with compliance, right? When are you doing compliance? Is it aligned with other processes, right? If you're already doing preventative maintenance on something that you need to do compliance checklists on, is that the same person? Is it different people? Are you taking advantage of the fact that somebody's already up there that month and could be checking it and getting prompted to do it, right? All of that stuff ends up adding to those current challenges. And again, what may not be seen as cost, right? Because I've heard it before as we go through this. Well, it's actually a bigger risk to change, right? Because if we miss compliance, right, and so they end up using compliance, right, to drive out the ability to innovate. And so, the fear of change sometimes is what stops change itself, which really leads us to the next step, right? which is change is hard. I can't tell you how many times we've talked to clients and they want to do something. Hey, I have these Revit models, or hey, I have, all of this information I just got from my contractor and we want to turn our building on. But we just, our process is paper-based. It goes into this system, or hey, I feed my CMMS system some information, but maybe not all the information. And so, right, but that's how we do it, because today we use this system, and you know what? Changing all of that is just, it's too hard, and it's too big of a lift. We're too big of an organization, right? All of those things. But what we just went through in the previous slides, right, of like, your information is disconnected. You're not taking advantage of this new stuff that's coming in. You're actually having to dumb stuff down to put it into systems and how they work today, and those systems are disconnected. I can't tell you how many clients I've walked into and said, okay, hey, I know that like fire life safety is a really big deal to you. I know that you need to make sure that you're compliant on this. Where does all that information live? Like, hey, do you have a floor plan that shows me all this stuff? Yep, I got a floor plan right here. Okay, awesome. Do you have a list? Where's your compliance list that you go through, right? And they go and they grab the list that they go through on the monthly basis, and hey, here's my checklist and here's what it is. And I go, okay, great. Now, has anybody ever made these line up? And what's your process? If somebody goes out in the field and changes something, or you go through a remodel and that fire extinguisher isn't there anymore, and the plans change, and now this system needs to be updated, what does that look like? And in the best case scenario, they have a process outlined where it's like, okay, well, floor plan changes come in, that gets our master set of documents updated, that has our master set of fire extinguishers on it. That gets updated in a design schedule, which then has to be exported and put into our other system. That's our compliance system. But in fact, this added a new wing, and that new wing is actually managed separately in our CMMS system. And so now we have wing A and wing B. And so the CMMS system says, hey, wing A needs to have their fire extinguisher checked on this month. But it doesn't list every fire extinguisher because our CMMS system isn't built to handle that kind of data fidelity in it. It's really meant to just tell me, hey, go do this. And then I have to go over to my compliance checklist system, and it might be digital, it might be paper. And now I'm going to go out, I'm going to check every fire extinguisher in that set. But how did that all flow together, right? And that's where everybody gets stuck, is that they've kind of pieced together these really well thought out, right? Because they're well thought out processes to solve for a problem that was really disjointed from the beginning, and they were set up for that. And so they've developed this system of processes based upon really something that was put in place 15, 20, 30 years ago, and they've just kind of tacked on and bolted on for that amount of time, and now they end up with kind of this Frankenstein of a system that in some cases works, but what's your exposure, right? What happens if NFPA decides that, hey, next year we actually need you to do X, Y, and Z and track 2 extra types of assets on a location-based level and check them every week, right? What would happen? Would it break? Would it crumble? What's your risk, and how would you even manage that? And so, again, I challenge people that all of those things that you put in your mind of what makes this hard, well, we've always done it this way, right? And because it's always been done that way, and don't get me wrong, there were a lot of hours and a lot of smart people in rooms putting these processes together. And all I continue to ask when I meet with people and have these conversations is, but is it transformative or is it just digitized, right? Are we transforming? We have technology, we have amazing technology, right? We have, you know, IoT and sensors and all these things. And, you know, are we doing this just because this is how it's always been done? What's our culture look like, right? You know, one of the things that I talk about now, especially, and this has only become kind of exasperated even in the last 12 months, when it comes to the culture of change, we're in this like mode right now of change being forced upon us, whether we like it or not. You know, we all had to deal with during the pandemic different ways of coping with being, you know, distant working, or hey, I still have to be on site, but how do we do that, you know, at a distance? We've all had to kind of rearrange our lives and our way of operating, sometimes for the better and sometimes for the worse. But now we're seeing this kind of shortage of labor, shortage of staff. You know, we can have tons of conversations along the periphery of why and where and how, but ultimately that's what's happening. And we're also seeing that, you know, this next generation of workforce doesn't tolerate things being done in a way that they deem inefficient. It seems crazy, but the amount of pushback that you'll get from, you know, giving somebody in some cases a task that they see that could be done better with technology, or, you know, the idea of going and looking it up in a file system when why can't I just Google it? You know, that is a reality of the upcoming workforce, and the fact that, you know, a lot of the folks that knew several trades and kind of grew up in facilities and had kind of this overall view of how to get in and how to go find things and where to find things, and, you know, where are these things hidden. I think to a lot of our healthcare clients who do fire damper checks, and there's probably only one or two people in some of these hospitals who even know where all of them are, and the only document that has them all on it is like hidden in the one facility manager's bottom drawer desk so that it doesn't get coffee stains on it because it's the only copy they have. And so, I mean, these are real stories, right, of how it's been done and how it's still being done, and understanding that and getting to the core, right, of where that fear comes from, of what it is it, you know, they feel like they need control because they manage it. Do we need to give better tools in the right spot? How do we really address some of that culture, you know, organizationally, to help move the needle? It's a big conversation that needs to be had. Some organizations are doing much better than others at it, but it's hard, right? Change is hard. Change is viewed as risk in a lot of these organizations, and how we deal with that, right, is key, which is why starting to talk about the future and the foundation, right? We talked about the why, we talked about how hard it is, we talked about the problems of, you know, basically dealing with the way things have been done and not using the technology for what it can be used for, which is to transform our industries, do more with less, run scenarios, get input, right? Tie this to foundational information that's updated via, you know, third-party websites, right, who are hosting these other data platforms in the future that can start to inform us in very specific ways around very specific problems, including but not limited to our exposure and risk on compliance. And so as we talk about building the foundation, and, you know, I talk to a lot of people in healthcare, I talk to a lot of people in government, and when you start talking about like, how do you deal with all of this stuff in the future, and how do you even start to adjust? Because, you know, I have this conversation all the time and everybody raises their hand, goes, that's not us. We want to be in the future. We want to move that way. We just don't know how. This is where we need to spend some time. This is where we need to have some conversations and understand, right, what is a foundation? what is a baseline? What's a digital twin? And how do I get one? And what does that mean? And how do we start to adapt my organization to be better? And so the way that I try to lay this out, and right, wrong, or indifferent, we can have some conversations. I love to get questioned on this. Some people kind of go the other way. I tend to lean into it starts with a good asset database. And I don't just mean, yeah, I have a CMMS system and I have my assets in my CMMS system, and that's my asset database. Because if you're a compliance-based organization, and I'm going to pick on healthcare, it's where most of my experience is with JACO specifically. Great, but does that have every fire extinguisher? Does that have every fire damper? Does that have everything that you need to go check, right? Your exit signs, your strobe lights, anything that you may have to come up with in a compliance check or when you go do a checklist, is that in your CMMS? And most people, the answer is no, right? And so that's where we really get into, well, then who's maintaining the other databases? Is that a compliance office? Is that, do you have a life safety group? Is there a general safety group? Is that still part of the facility's database? Do you have a third party hired that comes in and does some of that, right? But how do you know that they're auditing it correctly? And so it really starts with, and this is, again, I try to tell people, right, that this can be done incrementally, the same way everybody's in a different place. We need to start somewhere. And so when we start to talk about how do you build a foundation, how do you even start to approach the future, this, in my opinion, is your first step. If you don't know every asset that's in your facility, specifically assets that you need to do compliance on, you're not on good footings, and you absolutely have risk exposed if you don't have that stuff identified. I like to spend a little bit of time here talking about a digital twin because, in my opinion, a lot of people, and I lived this for many years, right? We sold the idea, especially out of the architecture and construction industry, that look at these really cool, we call them bill information models. Now it's a digital twin. Really, we sold them as these lifelike, realistic, full rendered fly-throughs that you could see everything in your building. Yes, that is correct. However, I think that puts a very, very small circle around the target that we need to hit. And in fact, we have a much bigger target that we can hit and still be successful. And so I always like to talk about the fact that, yes, what you're seeing on the right-hand side of the screen here, yes, that's a digital twin. You can actually see kind of the front. That's actually a LiDAR image. So it's a laser scan, right, to pull all that information in and get it highly digitally accurate. I will also argue that the thing on the left with the database on the right is also a digital twin of your building, right? The idea that you know where something is, it has a digital representation with a location in your building, whether that be in a cool looking 3D model or whether that be in a 2D floor plan with a location based upon your address, and Google Maps, right? That's a digital twin. It has data, it has location, it allows you to transform the way that you do things. Yes, there's a huge spectrum to what a digital twin can be. What's on the right may be one, but what was on the previous page is the other. And so you need to start somewhere. And so starting with what's on the previous page may be the right fit, especially if you have a lot of existing square footage where taking on something like creating a digital twin that's on the right just isn't financially sound and doesn't have the return on investment. And so again, we want to take advantage of the technology, but there's a way to take advantage of the technology and still transform your organization and how you approach compliance without necessarily going all the way in, which is what you're seeing on the right. Again, just to re-illustrate that point, right? Here's another example on the left of another LiDAR-based digital twin, and on the right is a simple floor plan with assets mapped and their information and data. And so I can still do as much with what's on the right from kind of organizational data flow, doing different types of workflows, transforming the way that we walk around and inspect things, right? Taking what used to be an expert-based process and turn it into something where we can, you know, the word sometimes gets misused or misrepresented, but really gamify something, right? I mean, look at what's coming up. Look at the generation that's coming. They want to see something in a web-based or mobile format that they can walk around and simply perform their tasks and get digital feedback and know where that feedback loop is coming from and get directed to something else, right? Think about all of the benefits that that come from this. You know, when you're in an area, hey, maybe there's something that wasn't followed up on from a previous compliance checklist, and it goes, hey, since you're already here, maybe you should go look over this other thing, right? That's all stuff that we're going to talk about coming up here as future opportunity. But until you start moving into a format to which you can truly start to take advantage of some of that next level transformative stuff that's coming, you're never going to get there. You're always going to wish, you're always going to look, and it's always going to seem too far away. And in fact, you know, as we get more and more technology that gets us further into the future, it's going to look further away. And so I always tell people, you need to start now if you want to get where you want to be in the next 5 to 10 years. So talked about all that. How do we get there, right? Well, we need to identify our opportunities and create a plan. Again, where can I start? I will always tell people that starting with the database is the best way. It's the easiest way. It still seems overwhelming. There are good partners out there that can help you get there. There are very efficient ways to do it, especially sometimes you don't have enough time to keep up with your own tasks. And so doing something like this seems overwhelming, which is why creating a plan, right? Where do we want to be? What goals do we want to hit? What technologies do you want to adopt? And start to create that plan. The idea of moving off of paper, right? Don't have the hidden drawer with the fire damper drawing that's, you know, literally marked up with red pen as to where you go and what order you go do them in every 2 years. Get that digitized, right? That is an opportunity. Well, I will say at least scanning and digitizing that document is a step in the right direction. The fact that coffee can't get spilled or, you know, the boiler room doesn't flood and that's wiped out forever, at least take a step towards digitizing that. I think it should be invested in a little more and getting truly to locating those things in a digital way with more information behind them, but at least move off that paper that's hiding in the bottom desk drawer. You know, the idea of deliberately implementing software, right? This is not just, hey, I have a problem, I need to go put in a solution, and you start going out and just saying, yep, here's one thing, let's try this, or let's try this. This software solves this problem, and this other software solves this other problem. Let's just go buy them, or you start buying them at different, you know, for different problem sets, right? That, you know, the worst thing that can go on is you go buy 4 different pieces of software and they all require some similar data. You know, without integrations, that's just prime and ripe for basically corruption very quickly, or at least the database is not aligning very quickly. And so again, based upon that plan that you created after saying, here's the technology and here's the benefits that we want to reap from that technology, and then going out and going through a deliberate process to identify a firm that can help you through that, help you meet your needs and get you to the end of the road, and then deliberately following through with that plan, that's what you really need to do. And start mapping major assets, right? That's the first thing, that's the easiest thing, but in a lot of cases you do need a technology to help you start doing that. And so as we go through and identify opportunities with compliance, as we start to map these things out, I always tell people it's not just about looking at what's in the plan. It's not just about getting your assets mapped. It's about what compliance are you doing, right? If you're in some manufacturing and you're worried about OSHA, there's some OSHA things that you need to do. If you're in healthcare and you're worried about Joint Commission, there's different things that Joint Commission has, right? And one specific one that we encounter a lot is like, I do daily walkthroughs, right? Inside my hospital. And when I do daily walkthroughs, I'm looking for specific things. And is there crossover, right, that I can actually start to put more into my daily round? Or if I'm out doing something like my fire extinguishers, and there's things that are part of my daily round that are around that fire extinguisher, right? And I actually check that off the list. Can that actually impact my daily round and shorten that for the other team, right? It's trying to figure out, where do I have alignment? You know, if I'm going up to do my preventative maintenance item on my generator, can I be doing my generator shutdown test for that month? Or is that a different person, a different team? And if it's a different person, a different team, are they specialized? If you're hiring out, there's not much opportunity, but if it's internal, is there a way to overlap some of that work as it goes on? And then are there other opportunities, right? If I have to go out and use a ladder, shouldn't I be inspecting the ladder as I use it, as opposed to going out and doing separate ladder inspections? And so just understanding some of those things and identifying those overlapping issues as you start to roll out technology will help you identify, again, the most streamlined way to pull those things together. Automate things, right? Is there a way to automate? We always look at technology in a way that, again, going past the digitization and going into true transformation. I have groups who used to have to go into their cooler facilities for food service, right? And they had to go in, they had these little punch cards, and it was crazy because this was like 2 years ago, and now they've completely changed their process. But it's these little punch cards on dial, and basically it was a little needle, and so over 24 hours, the needle was actually set based upon the temperature of the room, and they had to, every 24 hours, switch out these paper cards, because that was their record that refrigerator hadn't gone below the specified safety temperature, basically to stay in compliance for food safety, right? Great, super important that your refrigerators stay cool enough. But the idea that they had a person going around to 14 different coolers every single day, replacing a paper card, going back to the back office, filing the paper card only after they digitally entered it into a system that was basically tracking a spreadsheet of compliance, and then having the paper card for backup. That was a group who said, you know what else is out there? First of all, they needed a technology that they could go and put all of those things in where they were at and get something that would report out based upon the compliance of that. But then it was a matter of putting in the right IoT solution that could constantly monitor that task, right, and report back digitally into a digital database and give up to date, up to the minute readings of where it's at, give alerts when it's in and out of range, right, so that you can actually deal with it, move food, do whatever you need to do, right? That was an instance where they identified an opportunity. And not only that, it actually lowered their risk, because they weren't going to look at this thing, right, once a day and see what happened. They were getting automatic, up-to-date alerts to if that was even getting close to being out of range. And so that was an opportunity that was brought up, and they pursued it and implemented it successfully. You know, we start to look at things like tracking progress at maybe, you know, refrigerators are a real easy one to kind of ping on. The other thing, though, is like run times of different items. So, you know, for instance, medical facilities, if they have different types of patient rooms, one of the things that we've seen implemented well are different systems that basically positive, negative pressure rooms, putting a sensor in that tracks that, right? Automating some of those feedbacks, so now I don't have to go and do a test. I'm just getting that feedback fed automatically. The idea, right, of simplifying processes. So how do I go through and how do I take something that was a complicated process and simplify it? Things like QR codes, right? Being able to walk up something and scan it. That just saves time. Am I sure I'm standing in front of the right thing? Well, I don't know what I just did there. Am I sure I'm standing in front of the right thing, right? Am I tracking and resolving those issues? Again, it's just looking for those opportunities of even just going mobile. I have a lot of folks who are still walking around with paper clipboards, and just getting something on their phone is life-changing, right? Audit trails. Do you guys have good audit trails right now? Are you printing off and going into binders? Not to say that you can't go from a digital process and go into binders, but are you tracking that stuff? Because sometimes it's not just about passing it, right? Sometimes things fail. But when they fail, did you follow up? Is your inspection process tied to your CMMS system? Is it integrated? Are you automatically creating work orders from a failed inspection? Do you have an SLA that basically says that, hey, if this thing fails, it not only needs to create a work order, but that work order needs to be completed in 24 hours, 2 days, 1 week, whatever that time frame is that needs to be successfully completed. Is that being done, and do you have a way to audit it and track that, right? Those are all opportunities that if you're in paper today, those are things that are very hard. Even people that are in systems sometimes, down to the granular level of what happened to that fire extinguisher when it failed is sometimes hard. When the compliance officer walks on site and says, hey, when was the last time that you checked that fire door? Knowing how to go find that fire door fast enough is hard. Wouldn't it be better to open up a floor plan and say, which fire door, this one or the two around the corner? That's where the future comes in, right? And so, the thing I like to stress on is that new things are coming every day. We talk about IoT, I talk about, databases, things even as simple as are all of your assets in a list and tied to a national registry, right, for recalls. If something in your building is recalled, are you getting an alert? Especially if it's something that may affect your compliance, right? Are we tying into work order history? Are we seeing that something's failing more often and it's actually tied to a negative pressure room, and we can't afford that risk of that air handler unit going down because it's directly tied to the pressure of a very specific room in a hospital, right? Talking about AI and ML, artificial intelligence and machine learning are thrown around all the time. True AI, I think, has a place. It will start to make us better predictively. I think there's a lot of benefit that we can get initially out of just machine learning, but you need to have the database, and you need to have the data in a way and in a format that's accessible by these different engines to start to give you insight on your data, right? The databases, energy databases, life cycle databases, right? Costs, what's going on, being able to actually leverage your compliance and your inspection processes to drive capital spending to ensure compliance into the future, right? Are you seeing trends that are driving towards the fact that if you don't spend X dollars, it's going to put you at risk of compliance in the next 3 to 5 years? How is that tied in, right? This is the future vision, right, of being able to have your pulse on your building and know exactly what's going on at all times and where your risk is, right? It's the same thing as being able to want to go to the doctor and get that full check, or go get your car serviced and make sure they're checking all the different points every time you bring it in to look for a risk of failure. Is it that easy at your building or not? And if it's not, what changes can you make, and what opportunities are we seeing, and what future outcomes do you want, right? A lot of times we spend a lot of conversations kind of in this mode here, right? Talking through kind of like all the opportunities around your building, and what does compliance directly affect? Is compliance affecting how you do work order maintenance, right? Are you actually scheduling your PMs or giving preventative maintenance priority to key assets that are a part of compliance? Do you even have a knowledge of what those are? Are you using any kind of machine learning today? I mean, you think about, for instance, one use is, right, when you start to tie IoT and we start to talk about coolers, you can actually basically put sensors into your compressor motors, and basically how often your compressor cycles on and off and at the frequency to which your compressor cycles on and off can start to tell you through machine learning based upon listening to a bunch of compressors that that compressor is about to fail based upon how it's operating and cycling, right? That type of predictive knowledge, especially if you're running some kind of a food distribution system, and if your coolers go down and you have a lot of products sitting in those coolers, or it's something of a food safety issue because that food can't get above a certain degree, otherwise it all has to be discarded, right? All of that stuff is a big deal. And so driving some of this there and saying, you know what, that's a technology that would bring great benefit to my organization, is knowing if a compressor for my cooler is going to fail before it does. Because we had 6 losses last year that added up to, you know, a premium in our insurance. So that one we want to do, right? Having these conversations to know where you want to get to in the future will help us get there faster and actually maybe make some decisions early on the right way to make sure that we're making sure that that end outcome happens faster. And so things like nationwide databases, right? Being able to look at things like, hey, I have all these assets, here's when they were installed, and getting instant feedback based upon national averages of when those things are predicted to fail based upon your observed condition today. Looking at things like IoT, performance replacement, right? We just talked about the ability to basically monitor a compressor frequency to predict its failure. A lot of that stuff has to do the same with other things that spin and rotate, and so you can put things like vibration sensors on that start to tell you if things are falling out of balance, or maybe you need a shim, or maybe an axle's going, right? And then the real future, which is taking all of this data that we built out in our digital twins, we're pulling from all of this other stuff and starting to solve those real world problems. You know, whether it be predicting that compressor failure that's going to save you in losses and insurance claims, whether it be for, you know, the machine runtime failure on the air handler unit that's serving the negative pressure room, right? All of those types of things are possible once you start to collect the data to which you can feed the machine. I always leave this slide last because it's really the one that's still kind of on the edge. It's being used for some very specific use cases. You know, again, back to the beginning of the future is here, right? This is all being done, and I can give you stories of how it's being done successfully kind of in pockets, but this conversation is good because it's not really adopted yet by most of the industry. But it's something that's good to think about, because if there's end outcomes that we want to drive, you know, as industry leaders and as owners, right? Like, these are things for you to be aware of so you can start identifying, hey, if I'm going to try one future technology, boy, my biggest risk is around leaks in my roof. Cool. I actually have a webinar coming up with Built Worlds that they're going to be talking about IoT roofs, where the new roofing systems actually have a membrane underneath them that detects and locates exactly where the leak is and the volume of water coming through basically that leak point at that given time. And so again, that stuff's here, it's coming, it's starting to be installed places, but knowing that that's there, if that's a highly identified risk, it might be worth investigating, you know, and finding the ROI in something like that. And so, you know, with that, I really wanted to leave some time here at the end as well for some Q&A. I kind of covered a lot of different things. Change is a complicated issue, especially when it comes to something like compliance, because, you know, boy, there's safety, and this is how we've done it before. And so with that, I know, Ann, you've been collecting questions throughout here, and we had some earlier. Is there anything we want to address?
Yes, sure. Thank you, Josh. Thanks so much. And thank you to everyone for listening in. We do have time for some questions, so we'll jump right in there, Josh. Um, I'm going to put this out here because there's a few questions around this general idea. So I'm going to put this out to you, and then you can think on it, or we can move on to another question while you think on it. And basically, it was about how inspections. You had talked about automated inspections in that refrigerator example, for instance, on that slide a few slides back. So the question is, how do better inspections, let's say automated or otherwise, lead to improved compliance in your estimation? You talked about the refrigerator example, but specifically the questions we got here were maybe around indoor air quality or NFPA standards. Have you seen anything, how better inspections have led to better compliance outcomes? And you can take that now, or I can move on to a more general question.
No, let's take them as they come. I mean, point blank, if you're not doing a good inspections process, right, let's pick air quality, right? Are you replacing your air handler units or your air filters for your air handler units on a schedule? Or are you doing an inspection process based upon use, right? Because I can tell you doing work in schools, like around certain times a year, boy, you need to change those more than 3 months because there's a lot of dust and stuff coming up. And so, again, changing how you do inspections to be smarter 100% will drive outcomes in what you're after. And so if better air quality is something that you're after, doing something like usage-based filter inspections would help drive that. But I've even seen people drive towards even better reactions there and actually doing static pressure changes of air filters. So basically monitoring, because as that air filter gets dirtier, it's creating more static pressure inside the machine. And so you can actually monitor that static pressure buildup so that you know the exact moment to change that air filter based upon how dirty it is. And so I would argue 100% yes, that better inspection processes can absolutely drive end outcomes.
Okay, thank you. So then I'm going to jump into the tech piece of it in terms of the actual implementation and specifically about integration. And the question is, in order to ensure future integrations and compatibilities, what sorts of features should this software, inspection software, have? What types of features should folks be looking for? Future proofing. You were talking a lot about where we're going. So if they're looking to do this now, what additional tips would you give? Features, I guess.
Yeah, there's two things there. I think number one is that they're using industry standard format files. So i.e. they're able to actually ingest and use Revit files natively, right? That's key because that's really driving towards ultimately everything's going to be in Revit. We're not there yet. So driving towards that future of BIM is definitely one thing that I'd look for. The other thing is not just does it integrate with the new standard file formats, but do they play well with others? Do they have open API? Are they willing to do that? Because look, the future isn't, no matter how much there's a drive towards these, IWMS systems, we do everything perfectly. I truly believe that the future is in best in class and integration. And so, there's people out there who have fantastic, monitoring systems, or there's people out there who have fantastic, inventory systems. And being able to pick a partner that just plays well with others, I think is one of the most important things that you can go find.
Okay, great, thank you. And I have another question. It's with your software solution with AkitaBox, can I walk around inside a building structure with a mobile device, tablet, etc., and while standing in front of an asset, have my location identified on a 2D layout in real time? And then the comment is this would be a form of internal GPS. So can you talk about capabilities there?
Yeah, so that's a loaded question. We don't do it directly right now with AkitaBox, and to be frank, that is a huge undertaking organizationally to even put the infrastructure in place to be able to drive to that level of kind of like real-time location. The best examples you can find of this right now are there's some organizations, specifically healthcare actually, that's starting to invest heavily in it, where it's more the patient side right now, but it does take a heavy infrastructure development in another system, but we don't do that directly today.
Okay, thank you. So I want to thank everyone for sending in their questions, and we do have time, I think, for one last question, Josh, and this is kind of the overall, obviously, topic here. So what compliance rules and laws are coming down the pike? Obviously, the folks in the audience are, aware, what it entails for their work, but we're just trying to ask, from AkitaBox, what are you looking at? What are you seeing with your customers as far as, their what's coming down the pike and what's top of mind?
Yeah, I think what's coming down the pike is shortage of staff right now is one of the biggest changes. It's not directly a compliance change, but it's a reality that they're having to figure out, how do I do more compliance with less people? I think the other changes that we're just seeing is the typical kind of oscillation that happens typically in government shifts between more and less compliance, that just happens. And knowing that that change happens quite frequently, what we're really dealing with is organizations are having that change be hard. And so they're trying to figure out, to that future proofing, how do I put a system in place that I can truly manage to the unknown, as opposed to letting the unknown manage me.
Okay, all right. And one last question, actually. In terms of implementation, we talked about integration. Can you just quickly talk about what the process might be for onboarding, AkitaBox? What would that, entail, Jenna?
Yeah, AkitaBox specifically. So one thing we know here is that you're all busy, and our clients are busy, and they don't have time to do a lot of this. And so turnkey is important. And so we actually have implementation partners as well as some implementation staff ourselves. And our goal is that we will basically turnkey your project from mapping and creating all of this mapping solution, as well as implementing all of the compliance assets into the system as well. That's all turnkey. And so we really approach it with a good implementation team and implementation partners to get you going as soon as possible, basically without lifting a finger.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. I want to thank you, Josh, for the talk. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thank you to AkitaBox for sponsoring the webinar, and of course, everyone in the audience for attending today. A recording from today's session will be made available on the facilityexecutive.com website, and also please check it out at the AkitaBox website, and that's akitabox.com. So thanks again. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Bye, Josh.
Bye.